Hey guys, welcome back to another weekly trucking roundup. Today is Sunday, March 15th, and we are focusing on the top trending trucking news stories of the week. From the reduction of available trucking jobs to a new push for autonomous trucks to broker transparency gaining extra backers and more, let's break it all down and see how it is affecting our industry. Ready? Let's go! All right, so first up, let's talk about numbers and jobs. According to the latest from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, trucking lost nearly 2,000 jobs in February of 2025. Now, this isn't new though. Since 2023, trucking employment has been sliding in most months as companies try to adjust to a softer market. Freight volumes are down, rates are down, and companies are kind of trimming the fat. Now, for drivers who are looking for a new job, this might mean fewer available openings. So what's driving this? Well, mostly, of course, it's the economic uncertainty right now. The US added around 151,000 jobs last month, which is a big number, but it's less than people hoped for, and unemployment is up to 4.1%. And of course, trucking is no exception. It's kind of caught in the crosshairs, although experts do say that partly it's because of seasonality, with winter always being slow. Now, speaking of the reduction in trucking jobs, guess what these numbers ignite? Well, of course, they ignite this whole myth of a driver shortage, and with it, a push for autonomous trucks. Now, for years, we have been hearing how trucking doesn't have enough drivers, some saying that we are short 80,000 drivers right now. But this week's story says, hold up, that's not the whole picture. The OOIDA, as well as others in the industry, argue that no, there's no driver shortage. There's just a lack of good jobs, which causes a retention problem. Now, here is where it gets wild, and you will love this. Some big players like the American Trucking Associations and Bot Auto are using this whole shortage talk to sell more autonomous trucks. Bot Auto is even planning some driverless freight runs later this year, saying this will fix the problem. What's their pitch? Robots don't need brakes, they don't quit, and they can haul 24/7. But of course, the OIDA is not buying it, saying this is a convenient excuse to cut costs and dodge the real fix: better wages and respect for drivers. Now, advocates for autonomy are saying that, hey, this is not going to kill trucking jobs, it's going to change them, like monitoring rigs remotely, for example. This all sounds fancy, but the question remains, what happens when you add the human factor into the mix? What do you think? Tech savior or job stealer? All right, next up we have broker transparency, which seems to be in the news constantly over the past few weeks. Speaking of broker transparency, the commenting period is almost over. It ends on March 20th. But this week, Overdrive Online spotlighted a story on a push from the Transportation Lawyers Association, saying broker transparency could be the key to fighting freight fraud. Now let's go back in time for a minute. You remember Convoy, the big tech broker, went bankrupt all of a sudden, and thousands of carriers were left without payment. That's the kind of chaos the Transportation Lawyers Association is pointing to. They're saying that fraud and theft are running wild in this industry as of late, the past 3 years. And it's not just because of rates, it's because of basic fairness. Here's the deal. Federal rules already say that brokers are supposed to keep all of those records, like what the shipper paid and everything related to the load. But when things go south, like they did with Convoy, those records could have helped track stolen freight and unpaid hauls. Instead, carriers were left in the dark. Here's where it gets spicy. We all know this. Brokers happen to be very much against broker transparency because they believe that this is going to push rates down further, that is going to increase their paperwork, and basically it will be a race to the bottom. But many carriers are actually very much for broker transparency because they want to see what the shipper paid. But these lawyers who are joining in the fight for broker transparency aren't even focused on rates. They are only focused on fraud. They say that those records are golden for bankruptcies, lawsuits, or catching thieves. So where's this headed? Well, these lawyers want the FMCSA to enforce the broker transparency rules hard so that the brokers cough up every single record. Now let's dive into regulations, where FreightWave this week has reported that the current administration just axed some costly truck regulations, killing an expected pre-buy surge. Now, it's a win for some, it's a headache for others, but one thing is for sure, it's got the trucking world buzzing. Truck makers and fleets have been readying themselves for a massive pre-buy. Think thousands of orders for heavy-duty vehicles. And this was ahead of the strict emissions rules that were supposed to kick in 2027. Those rules, cooked up under the previous administration, were focusing on slashing truck emissions with pricey new technology. But this week, the script flipped, calling it the most consequential deregulation day ever. Now, manufacturers were expecting a boom, think extra shifts, full order books, but now, for drivers and carriers, however, it's the opposite. For them, it is a relief. So basically, truck makers and suppliers, ouch, they were really banking on that pre-buy cash. No surge means flat sales, and they're stuck with inventory plans that do not match reality. You know what it reminds me of? It's like you were planning to hauled that one load that was unlike any other, paying way above market rate. You get there and the load is canceled. But of course, for the broader industry, it is a completely different story. Fleets did not want to flood the industry with extra trucks just to dodge regulations, especially with freight still being on wobbly ground and cash not being so readily accessible. All right, now let's focus on freight here for a little while, specifically the tug of war between carriers and shippers. Breakthrough State of Transportation report dropped on March 12th via the CCJ, and they surveyed freight leaders, about 150 carriers and 300 shippers. The verdict? 57% of shippers say that cost is their top worry when picking a carrier to work with. Now, for trucking, this means pressure because shippers want cheap hauls, while truckers, they cannot dodge the fuel spikes and the increasing cost of everything else. Now, this particular report predicts that there is going to be somewhat of a flip in Q2 of 2025 in the market. Now, let's say that this does happen. That's great for volumes. But if shippers continue resisting the higher rates, carriers are going to continue operating on slim margins. Now, of course, shippers, considering the fact that they are expecting there is going to be a flip coming soon, they're looking for solutions. What did they say? More than 55% are looking to expand their additional transportation modes to rail and intermodal. 47% plan to give more freight to their core carriers. And only 39% are looking to actually diversify carrier relationships. So what does this mean for trucking in general? Well, it's kind of the big carrier versus small carrier battle at this point, although this has been a battle forever now. Big carriers with established ties are definitely grinning right now. 47% of shippers doubling down on core partners means steady gigs for those big carriers. Think consistent volumes, better rate talks, maybe even growth. But smaller carriers, ouch, only 39% of shippers are looking to diversify their carrier network. Basically, shippers aren't really looking to work with fresh faces. So that's a wrap for this week's trucking news. Some good news, some bad news, and pretty much the majority of them are still in developing stages. Which one are you eyeing closely, and how do you see that whole thing playing out? For me personally, I'm really focused on the shipper story right now and how their plans, if the market flips, will put smaller carriers at a disadvantage. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning, and I will see you in the next video.